Thank you, Dana. So I wanted to briefly cover, the mineral supplementation of cattle on wheat pasture. Last week, Dr. Ryan Reuter did a great job talking about, some of the biggest variability that occurs in the wheat pasture enterprise, and that's forage production in the fall, and how we can, make some adjustments in stocking rate or supplementation to maintain animal performance at a proper level. But we've got a lot of producers that go very basic on our mineral supplementation on wheat pasture, and there's a lot of improvement that could be made in that. So when we look at the mineral profiles of wheat pasture, and this is based on about 8 trials that I've been involved with, when we're looking at mineral profiles of wheat pasture, calcium is probably the one that's of primary concern. The average content across these several trials was right at 0.45%. And if we're looking at a calf, 500-pound calf gaining over 2 pounds a day, the requirement's going to be way over that, right at about 0.64%. So, we've got a deficiency in that. And we've got a small deficiency in phosphorus. So it could be adequate to inadequate based on the variability. So right at 0.28 to 0.3 is the content, and the requirement's right at 0.3 as well. So we're going to call it a deficiency as well. The other issue that we often think about with the mineral content of wheat pasture is magnesium, and that's going to be an issue with cows at calving, but on stocker calves, it's considered to be adequate for calves grazing wheat pasture. The issue with magnesium, though, comes from the very high content of potassium in well-fertilized and well-managed wheat pasture. When we're fertilizing for all the agronomic needs of that wheat plant, we'll, a lot of times want to include potassium in that mineral or fertilizer mix, and we're going to increase the content of the potassium of that wheat pasture. So it's going to be quite a bit excessive above the requirements of those animals. The other two that come to mind, that they're also tend to be deficient across most or many instances, would be copper and zinc, with a slight deficiency with copper and a fairly larger deficiency in zinc. So when we look at calcium, we know that's important in bone, and a lot of it's found in bone, but it's important in membranes, hormones, and muscle contraction. So the problem, one of the problems we have, everybody thinks about on wheat pasture, is bloat. Well, part of that, we want to have good, robust muscle contractions of that rumen to keep the rumen stirred. So, if we are deficient in calcium, we can tie that to some of the bloat problems we have, along with the nutrient profile of the wheat pasture. So that all kind of ties together with that. It's tightly regulated, so it's going to be important to show, being the absorption from the bone for cows as well. So if we have low blood calcium when we have cows that are just calving, that leads to the milk fever issue. Phosphorus is also important in cell membranes, and all metabolic reactions as well. And it's, you know, the final step in all of our energy transfer reactions metabolically. So, you know, deficiency in phosphorus can lead to frank issues with performance as well and reproduction. Magnesium, it's, you know, in the bones and also in the soft tissue. It is involved in skeletal integrity, neuromuscular transmissions, and energy metabolism. And when we start getting into grass tetany and you know, the symptoms tied to that, that's related to the neuromuscular issues with magnesium deficiency. So as I said before, if we're looking at grass tetany potential, it's tied to excessive potassium. We want the ratio of potassium to calcium and magnesium to be less than 2. And if we look at that wheat pasture over those several trials that we looked at, you know, the forage levels of calcium, magnesium, and potassium, that averaged right at 3.6. So, you know, it's very important to increase magnesium in the mineral of cows 1 month prior to calving to offset the grass tetany potential of wheat pasture. Copper is another one that's important in immune systems and enzyme function. High levels of sulfur and molybdenum can also impact copper uptake. So if we have higher sulfur in water, lots of places in the southeast have molybdenum issues, and you know, this can tie up that copper and make a small copper deficiency into a much bigger copper deficiency. And zinc is another one that's deficient in wheat pasture. Its absorption is reduced by both high calcium and phosphorus, so all these are interrelated as far as the way they're taken up in the gut. These trace minerals, most of those, they don't require very much, but they're very tied to these enzyme systems, hormonal functions. Zinc is one that's important in wound healing and immune response, as well as skin integrity. And if we have real wet conditions, and we've seen a lot of this in dairies, feeding a high level of a good zinc source can improve foot health and lead to improvements in eye health as well. So zinc is very important, but all of those that are deficient in wheat pasture in different studies have also been tied to improved growth response when we take care of those deficiencies. So I've got a series of studies here where the control was a common white salt block fed to cattle on wheat pasture, compared to a well-balanced mineral that fits the profile of wheat pasture. And in two of these studies, we have a mineral with rumensin involved as well. So the first two here are at the Marshall Wheat Pasture Research Unit west of Stillwater. And in these two different years, we saw from a a 0.13 to 0.48 pound per day increase in average daily gain just by providing mineral, a real well-balanced mineral to take care of these deficiencies. As well, on top of both of those, we saw the common improvement in gain response that we would expect with a Rumensin supplement. These next two studies are at the Southern Plains Range Research Station at Northwest Oklahoma, up by Fort Supply. This was done in the fall and the spring as well. And just providing a well-balanced mineral program increased the gains of those calves by right at half a pound a day. Also in these last two are some research I was involved with in Arkansas during my time there, and during the fall and spring, compared to just a plain white salt block, we saw, from 0.15 to 0.4 pound per day increase in average daily gain just by providing that loose mineral balanced to provide the, calcium at about 12%. Commonly, these contain about 6% phosphorus, along with the trace mineral packs you would expect from a good mineral source. So in conclusion, the response to the corrected mineral deficiencies is really expected if we look at the different literature where we've looked at response to calcium when it's deficient or phosphorus when it's deficient, zinc and copper. We've seen average daily gain increases just providing those minerals independently of each other. So when we're fixing these deficiencies with a well-fortified mineral, we especially when we have a deficiency, we can expect to see that. The combined response is right about 3 to 4/10 a pound a day. And Rumensin, we can virtually, in most instances, we can say we're going to see at least a 2/10 to 4/10 of a pound increase in average daily gain per day by providing Rumensin with that loose mineral as well. And finally, the correction for magnesium levels is essential for early lactation cows. This is, one of those things that's, got to be taken care of if we're going to use wheat pasture in the way that Dave is going to talk about, and supply about a 10% magnesium mineral prior to calving. And with that, that's what I wanted to share today, and we'll pass it on to Dave.